So maybe it's a little late in the series to even address the question, but I think it's worth asking. What is organic? What does it mean? Why? Like what's the deal? So there's different levels of people's definitions and governmental standards or moral standards. And I guess what I'd say is that the way that I would define organic is normal, realistic, wholesome, possible, just everyday decent living. So if you're going organic or if I say, you should eat organic and you're conjuring up visions of, granola and, bone broth, and which they're both great, by the way, but if they're taking up some disproportionate amount of your diet that is not normal, then there's a problem. And if you do something that isn't normal, which means something that isn't tried and true, hasn't proven itself to be a realistic lifestyle by the course of history, then odds are it's going to be short-lived and you will return back to your previous normal. Because in order to change your lifestyle, you have to decide to do things that are realistic. And I'm not saying that having bone broth once every day is unrealistic, but or granola. It's just it has to be something feasible, something that you could see yourself willingly doing every day of your life and enjoying it. And all these weird fad diets and whether it's you're keto and now everybody's on the carnivore diet, and before that it was raw vegan, totally on the other end. And there's no doubt that any of these diets or that all of them will change the way that you feel, even if only temporarily, but often quite quickly, because it's a radical change and your body does respond. But just because something can create a radical change and deal with a few symptoms, it doesn't mean that you could happily continue to live your life this way. And if you can, hey, all the power to you. But odds are that's not going to happen. And for pretty obvious reasons. If the discomfort that you are suffering with a bad diet, if it's really, really, really bad, then it is plausible that taking on a new diet, even if it's a bit extreme, might be less uncomfortable, and so you might consider doing that in the long term. But generally speaking, when I'm talking to just the general public, they may have suffered some mild discomfort with their everyday crappy food living, or maybe even a significant amount. But generally speaking, we're creatures of habit, and there has to be enough cause and reason to do something that we don't enjoy doing. And so odds are you're not going to continue doing that thing. So let's be real. An organic diet, it has to be real. I'm not talking about eating some inordinate amount of organic veggies from the local farmer's market. That's not what it's about. It shouldn't exclude things by law, like, well, if you're eating organic, I guess you can say goodbye to eating a donut. Well, you can just make an organic donut. Donuts existed before conventional food came along and turned it into a chemical shitstorm. My wife makes donuts, they're fantastic, I love them. Cake, pie, like all these good things existed before chemicals, and they were a normal part of people's lives. and they weren't bad things, but the issue, when you, especially when you inject convenience, right? You don't have a time to make, a pie. If you made a pie, you'd realize it takes a bit of time and energy. So if we eliminate the ability to just buy a crappy pie for almost no money, and you have to make it yourself, well, maybe you make a pie once a month, and that's not so bad. It's not going to have a negative impact on your health. It will just, you'll appreciate it, you'll enjoy it, and that's good. So organic does not mean, eating mostly foods you don't want to eat. That's completely untrue. We've had many people visit us and they have their idea of what organic food means, and they sit down at the table and they marvel at all the wonderful things they get to eat. So yeah, it has to be realistic. It even has to be enjoyable. It's not a crazy fad. So what does it mean? Like organic, obviously I hope we know that means no chemicals, but we're not talking about just no chemicals because, hey, well, that might hurt a bug, or, the peregrine falcon with the DDT. And those are the kind of things we think of, and we think, why are you charging me more food to, save presumably some endangered species? That's not the kind of idea I would want conjured up when you think organic. It's more like, you go into your closet or the grocery aisle, the superstore, or whatever, filled with the cleaning products, all the chemicals you shouldn't put in your mouth. We had commercials, don't you put it in your mouth. Here's the issue though, right? When you buy crappy food, that's what you're putting in your mouth, and much, much worse. A cleaning product has some bleach in it, but I'm talking chemicals that make insects fall on their backs and have spasms. So if you're wondering why there's a massive outbreak of neurological disorders that manifest themselves with involuntary twitching and partial paralysis, maybe consider the fact that you're eating food sprayed with chemicals that kills insects by causing spasms and partial paralysis. Don't put it in your mouth. And it's not something you go wash your veggies. Like when you spray an apple orchard and all those little, navel end of the apple with the stem, when all those fill up with little puddles of pesticide, do you think it just runs off the side and you can just wipe it with a rag and you're done? It just sits there and soaks into the core slowly in the hot summer sun. And then you eat it. If you do lab tests on conventional food, the chemicals are in there. And the miracle is that, well, all the bugs died, but you don't die immediately when you eat the apple, so right on. But it's not so miraculous when you eat 1,000 apples. And never mind the apples you're eating, the strawberries, which are, they're horrendously contaminated with every chemical under the sun and every metal, and it's horrifying. And you can do a little study on the strawberry, and you can measure a tiny little amount, and you can say it has almost no effect. But it's like interest. Maybe you don't make very much interest on your money, but over the course of a lifetime, like it's cumulative. You've got like a little chemical bank account that you keep depositing into, and eventually, you've got quite a savings account of death on the inside. And then you thought you were eating healthy because you were eating vegetables, and now you've got some kind of cancer because there were portions of your body that just stopped knowing how to regulate reproduction. And so, you broke the stop reproducing trigger inside your cell, and now there's just like, a piece of your lung is like, let's make several billion more lung cells, and now you've got a big lump there, and it's suffocating you because you've had cells that went rogue. And why? Because they're sick. You poisoned them. So, like, get real. It's not a matter of saving a bird or a tortoise or a whale or something. It's you. It's you and your children, right? Like it's poisonous. It's not a joke. It's not something to be dismissed quite so easily. And like think, you give a conventional apple to your child, and maybe you think no harm done, or I don't do it very often. Most of the time I do this or that, or oh yeah, I get lots of people, and oh well, yeah, my mom, she grows her own garden, and you what? You get vegetables from her a couple of times a year. Like that's not that fantastic. In the meantime, you feed your child something that isn't organic, and that child is now a little bit closer to death. Is that registering? Like, you poisoned him just a little bit, and now he's going to get cancer a week sooner. And you were involved in that process. Let's start thinking in those terms. If you get cancer when the chemical bank account gets to 100, just because you were the person to give that bank account the first $2, it doesn't mean you're less responsible than the guy who gave him the last $2. Just because your kid is 38 years old when he finally fills the bank account up to 100, eating wherever he wants to, it doesn't mean you're not responsible for depositing the first few installments. Like you all work together to poison the poor guy. Let's think about this reasonably. And it's so important. We live in a rational world created by a rational God. And if you can't reason, you're doomed. And so this isn't complicated stuff. It isn't mysterious. There are no cancer fairies sprinkling. There are no family genetic lines that are more susceptible. And let's discuss that for a second. So no, cancer is not genetic, as in it can be passed through genes like the color of your eyes, for example. It is genetic in that, and consider this, if you're a pregnant woman, I forget the exact week of pregnancy, but if you're carrying a girl, I think somewhere maybe at 9 weeks or so, that little girl actually is developing her sexual organs, and all of the eggs now are inside of her, which means that the eggs for your grandchildren are inside of you when you're only, 9 or 10 weeks pregnant. Don't quote me on that, but it's pretty close. So think about that, the way that you're eating. Maybe you don't think about it so seriously, but what you're eating when you're just barely pregnant is going to have consequences, 40 years down the road. So then they do the statistical analysis and they say, well, so-and-so got cancer, and well, the mother, she also got cancer. Don't you think that a mother that has a toxic liver, who's got a child inside of her, that's what jaundice is. It's a toxic baby. They tell you they just need a little bit of sunlight. Like if your baby is born jaundiced, its liver is already failing and it was just born. Wake up. So yeah, like is it genetic? Well, you gave it to the child by your choices, and you passed it through the creation of cells. So in that sense, yeah, genetics are loosely involved. And then after the child's born, you reinforce the toxicity you've already shared by feeding it the same crap that got you toxic to begin with. So that's kind of a pretty big deal, seeing as everybody's claiming to love their children, and yet they have a callous disregard for their health. And then they come to our store and people are shocked to find out that children should not get sick every year. Your children should not have a flu and be puking once a year or twice a year. They should not have a cold 4 times a year. If your children are getting sick 4 to 8 times a year or more, is an immune system failure completely, and it's your fault. Why? Because it's your responsibility. So if your child's getting sick that much, you can fix it, and if you're not fixing it, it's because you really don't love your children as much as you say that you do. Because there's so many things you can do about it. They're limitless, and they're affordable. So, that's what organic is about. It's about personal responsibility. We could talk for hours about what it does to the environment, and the environment, it takes its vengeance back on you. You can't just go dump a pile of chemicals out there to get cheap food and then test the food to make sure it's not so bad for you, and don't think that the environment isn't waiting to just punish you for what you've done, because you live in the environment. So that's a little naive. And actually that portion of it makes me particularly angry, because it's bad enough for people to make shitty decisions and eat crappy food, but when they're poisoning the environment that I also live in with my children and those that I love, the environment the Lord created, I do get a little angry. I get very angry, because it's a disgraceful, evil, reprehensible crime against your neighbor to treat with disregard that which belongs to all of us. What else can I say about organic? We tend not to get too personal about it when we're talking about plants and strawberries and apples and all that. But there are animals involved, not just people. And I almost think, like, why bother bring up the animals when the people are primarily suffering? But for a number of reasons. One, that animals are creatures, and they ought not to be harmed. And yeah, before all the vegans get up on me for that, I'll clarify. They ought not to be mistreated. They ought to be respected and treated with care and love and kindness. And I'm sure there are those, and some already have, that will object and say, how kind is it to raise an animal just to kill them? And I would argue, very much so. It's very kind. It's much more kind than letting a whole species or breed of animal go into extinction because there's no practical purpose for having them around. Perpetuating the genetics of a beautiful chicken or a beautiful goat by incorporating it into your life and exchanging life for life and caring for a creature in exchange for its life. It's a cooperation. You're both giving up your life for one another so that both of you can prosper. And we prosper when we propagate our genetics and populate the earth with ourselves. Animals do the same thing. And I assure you that if you release them onto the earth, particularly the agricultural animals, with no care, no regard, no wisdom, they will fail to propagate themselves. Most of them will. They simply won't prosper as they could with diligent, wise farmers helping them to prosper. No different than corn. If nobody ate corn, corn would disappear. Corn has to be grown and eaten for corn to maintain its cornness and be grown for another year. That's just a fact. If there's no practical utility for it, it will disappear. Same thing would happen to most animals and most varieties of animals. Same thing with dogs. Maybe this is a total aside, but I'm going to deal with it anyway. Dogs, people raise up different. I really love, this kind of dog. I really love that kind of dog. You're taking a dog and you're keeping it in whatever constraints for your own pleasure so you can have it as a pet, and I'm not objecting to it, although in some cases I don't think it's ethical, but just generally speaking, having pets I understand, but you've breeded an animal strictly for your pleasure. That's it. You wouldn't have an animal if you didn't like having that animal. You can get all altruistic about it all you like, and, but like if you love dogs, that's why you have dogs, because you love dogs. And that's ultimately selfish, but not condemnably, whatever. It's not evil to have something for your selfish purpose. necessarily. So when it comes to organic agriculture, I don't care if you're feeding them 100% organic. I don't care if it's totally chemical free. If those animals are being disgraced in any way, it's not organic anymore. Because organic isn't just a technical term about chemicals. Like the government has created this sterile identity of organic. It's like, well, it just can't have chemicals, and we'll put a couple of like minimum morality rules around it, like some kind of, ethical treatment of the farm workers and the animals, and that's it. Organic has been robbed by bureaucrats of its full depth and meaning. Organic means, maybe to sum it up, it's getting to be long. Organic is the absolute best thing for God, man, and all creation. It's the best thing. If there's a better way that you know how to do something, that's what you do. And that's how it becomes organic. It's the best.